Welcome back to Nighttime History. Tonight, we journey into the gentle world of medieval monasteries, where stone walls echoed with quiet acts of kindness and wooden bowls held more than food. They held hope. We're exploring the almonry, the heart of monastic charity, where monks devoted their lives to helping the poor through careful systems of giving that stretched across centuries. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful exploration. Settle into your favorite spot, let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to drift back nearly 1,000 years as we discover how these sacred communities became lifelines for the desperate and destitute. The morning mist clings to the monastery walls as you stand before the heavy wooden gates. Beyond these weathered stones lies a world most people never see, a place where charity flows as steadily as the canonical hours that mark each day. You are witnessing the almonry in action, that sacred space where medieval monks transformed religious duty into practical compassion. The word almonry comes from the Latin eleemosynarium, meaning a place for giving alms. But this simple translation barely captures what you see unfolding before you. This is not random charity or occasional kindness. This is a carefully orchestrated system that has fed, clothed, and sheltered the poor for centuries. The monastery behind these gates operates like a medieval welfare state, complete with administrators, record keepers, and distribution schedules that would impress any modern bureaucrat. You hear the soft shuffle of feet on cobblestones as figures emerge from the early morning shadows. These are the poor of the surrounding villages and towns, drawn by the promise of bread, ale, and sometimes coin. They know exactly when to arrive. The monastic schedule never varies. Most people think medieval charity was unpredictable, dependent on the whims of nobles or the occasional generous merchant. But actually, monastic alms followed rigid timetables that the poor could count on as surely as sunrise. The great gate creaks open and you see him. The almoner, identifiable by his brown habit and the large wooden bowl tucked under his arm. His face shows neither judgment nor pity, just the calm efficiency of a man who has performed this ritual thousands of times. He represents one of the most important officers in the monastery, second only to the abbot himself in many communities. Yet his work requires the subtlest of skills. Too much generosity and the monastery's resources vanish. Too little and souls go unsaved, both the poor who suffer and the monks who fail in their Christian duty. Watch as he takes his position at the almonry window, a small opening cut into the monastery wall specifically for this purpose. The window itself tells a story. It faces away from the main church toward the secular world where need dwells. Its size prevents large crowds from forming, but allows for personal interaction. The stone ledge beneath bears the smooth wear of countless hands that have reached through for sustenance. The almoner opens his record book, a thick volume bound in leather that chronicles every gift given. You might expect medieval charity to be casual, untracked, a simple matter of heart overhead. But actually, these monks kept meticulous records that would satisfy any modern auditor. Every loaf of bread, every cup of ale, every worn garment given away appears in neat Latin script. Not because they were heartless bureaucrats, but because they understood something profound. True charity requires wisdom. Resources must be managed carefully to help the most people over the longest time. The first recipient approaches the window. She is an elderly woman, her back bent with age and labour. The almoner knows her. His records show she has visited every Tuesday and Friday for 7 months. She receives 2 loaves of bread and a cup of small ale, the weak beer that serves as the safest drink for those who cannot afford wine. He marks her visit with a quick stroke of his quill, noting the date and the gift in letters so small and precise they seem like artwork. You notice something remarkable in this exchange. No sermons, no lengthy prayers, no demands for gratitude or promises to reform. The woman receives her bread with a quiet blessing and moves on. This reflects a sophisticated understanding of poverty that many modern people would find surprising. Medieval monks recognized that hunger weakens both body and spirit. A starving person cannot focus on salvation or self-improvement. Feed the body first, and the soul becomes receptive to higher truths. The system you are witnessing evolved over centuries of trial and refinement. Early monasteries often gave too freely, bankrupting themselves in months of overzealous charity. Others became too restrictive, turning away genuine need while hoarding resources. The successful communities learned to balance compassion with sustainability, creating what we now recognize as the first systematic approach to social welfare in Western Europe. Behind the almoner, you glimpse the interior of the almonry itself. This is not just a storage room, but a complex operation center. Wooden shelves line the walls, stocked with loaves of bread in various stages of freshness. The monks follow strict rotation principles, ensuring that day-old bread goes to the poor before it spoils, while fresh loaves wait for tomorrow's distribution. Clay jugs hold ale and wine, while wooden chests contain clothing donated by wealthy patrons or woven by the monks themselves during evening work hours. Most people imagine medieval monasteries as isolated communities focused entirely on prayer and contemplation, but actually, successful monasteries served as economic engines for their regions. The almonry represents just one branch of a complex enterprise that included farming, brewing, textile production, manuscript copying, and money lending. The charity you witness depends entirely on the wealth generated by these other activities. The sun climbs higher as more recipients gather. You see men whose calloused hands speak of lives spent in manual labor, children whose hollow cheeks reveal families stretched beyond their means, and women whose patched clothing tells stories of making do with less and less. Each person knows their place in line, their allotted portion, their expected day of return. This is not chaos but choreography, a dance of need and supply that has been perfected through generations of practice. Let us stop here for a moment, dear travellers. If you are finding peace in these quiet scenes of medieval charity, please consider joining our community of nighttime explorers by subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications for new journeys through history. A gentle like helps support our work and lets other restless minds find these calming historical adventures. We would love to know in the comments where you are settling in to listen tonight and what time zone is cradling you as we explore the past together. Now let us continue deeper into the almonry's daily rhythms. The record keeping you have glimpsed represents just the visible surface of a complex administrative system. In a chamber adjacent to the distribution window, scribes maintain multiple ledgers that track not just daily giving but seasonal patterns, individual cases requiring special attention, and the ebb and flow of resources that allow the almonry to function. One ledger records the names and circumstances of regular recipients. Medieval monks understood that poverty comes in many forms. Some people need temporary help during harvest failures or family illnesses. Others require long-term support due to age, disability, or circumstances beyond their control. The monks developed different categories of aid for different types of need, creating what amounts to an early form of social service assessment. You watch as a younger monk consults these records, running his finger down columns of careful notations. Here is Margaret the widow, who receives bread and ale twice weekly since her husband died in the mill accident. There is Thomas the lame, whose twisted leg prevents heavy labour, but whose sharp mind makes him useful for light tasks around the monastery grounds. Each entry tells a story of human struggle, met with systematic compassion. The most surprising aspect of this record keeping involves its sophistication in tracking resources and planning ahead. The monks maintain detailed inventories of their food stores, tracking harvest yields, preservation rates, and seasonal availability. They know exactly how many loaves their ovens can produce daily, how much grain they must reserve for their own community, and how much remains available for charitable distribution. This level of planning allowed medieval monasteries to maintain consistent aid even during difficult years when other forms of charity failed. Another fascinating element emerges as you observe the careful attention paid to preventing fraud or abuse. The monks have developed subtle ways to verify genuine need without humiliating their recipients. They note patterns in requests, cross-reference stories with local knowledge, and maintain relationships with village authorities who can provide context about family circumstances. This is not suspicion but stewardship, ensuring that limited resources reach those who need them most. The afternoon brings a different rhythm to the almonry window. The morning crowds consisted mainly of local poor who knew the routine. Now you see travellers, pilgrims, and occasional refugees from distant troubles. These require different consideration. How does one assess the needs of strangers? How can limited resources stretch to accommodate unpredictable demands? Here too, the monks have developed systematic approaches. Travellers receive smaller portions but more immediately useful items like hard bread and dried meat suitable for the road. Pilgrims often receive special consideration, as hospitality to religious travellers carries particular spiritual merit. Refugees present the greatest challenge, as their needs may be both urgent and long-term, requiring the almoner to make difficult decisions about resource allocation. The shadows grow longer as the day's final recipients approach the window. You notice how the almoner's manner remains consistently gentle despite hours of repetitive interaction. This reflects careful training in what the monastic rules call discernio, the ability to discern appropriate responses to human need. The almoner has learned to read faces, to recognize the difference between genuine desperation and opportunistic requests, to balance firmness with compassion. As the first pale light touches the monastery's eastern wall, you feel the subtle transformation that marks the beginning of each day's charitable ritual. The air carries a different quality now, filled with the mingled scents of fresh bread from the monastery ovens and the damp earth of the surrounding fields. This is the hour when the almonry truly comes alive, when centuries of refined practice converge into a daily miracle of organized compassion. The heavy wooden door of the bakehouse creaks open, releasing a cloud of warm, yeast-scented air into the cool morning. Brother Benedict emerges, his arms laden with loaves still radiating heat from the ovens. These are not the fine white breads reserved for wealthy patrons or special feast days. Instead, you see the sturdy brown loaves that form the backbone of monastic charity, dense with barley, oats, and whatever grains the harvest provided. Each loaf represents careful calculation, baked to provide maximum nutrition while stretching limited resources as far as possible. Most people assume medieval bread was uniformly coarse and unpalatable, but actually, the monastery bakehouse produces several distinct types based on the recipient's needs and the community's available ingredients. The bread destined for the almonry window receives special attention. The bakers add extra salt to help it last longer, knowing that poor families often cannot consume their allotment immediately. They shape the loaves slightly smaller than those served in the monastery refectory, allowing each batch to feed more recipients without appearing stingy. You watch as Brother Benedict arranges the loaves in wicker baskets, each one carefully counted and recorded in his mental tally. He has performed this task for 12 years, and his movements show the unconscious precision of long habit. The baskets themselves tell their own story, woven from willow branches grown in the monastery's own marshlands, maintained and repaired by monks during their evening work hours. Nothing here exists by accident. Every tool, every container, every method has been chosen and refined through decades of practical experience. The bell tower releases its first call of the day, the bronze voice echoing across the surrounding countryside. This is not just a time signal, but a dinner bell for the desperate, a sound that has trained generations of poor to associate dawn with the possibility of sustenance. In villages within walking distance of the monastery, children learn to recognize this particular bell among all the others that mark the medieval day. Families experiencing hardship rise at its sound, beginning the sometimes lengthy journey to the almonry gate. Near the gate itself, you notice something remarkable that challenges common assumptions about medieval attitudes toward poverty. A stone bench runs along the monastery wall, worn smooth by countless bodies seeking rest during long waits. Fresh straw covers the ground nearby, replaced weekly by monastery servants. A covered well provides clean water for those who arrive thirsty from distant villages. These amenities exist not from legal requirement or social pressure, but from the monk's recognition that comfort for the poor reflects divine compassion. The almoner appears at the gate precisely as the bell's final notes fade. His punctuality is legendary among the local poor, who have learned to set their own schedules by his reliable appearance. Brother Thomas has served as almoner for 8 years, selected not just for his piety, but for his practical skills in managing people and resources. His training included months of observation under his predecessor, learning to read the subtle signs that distinguish genuine need from opportunistic requests. He carries with him the tools of his trade. A wooden measuring cup ensures consistent portions of ale and wine. A small balance scale allows him to weigh out precise amounts of grain or dried goods. Most important is his leather satchel containing the day's allocation of small coins, copper pennies that represent the monastery's direct monetary charity. The amount varies based on the season, the community's financial health, and special circumstances that may have arisen since the previous distribution. The first recipients have already gathered in the pre-dawn darkness, and you can see their faces clearly now as daylight strengthens. Here stands Agnes the seamstress, whose arthritic fingers can no longer manage the fine stitching that once earned her living. She receives special consideration, given bread every other day rather than the twice-weekly portion allotted to most regular recipients. The monks recognize that her skills, while currently limited by age and infirmity, still provide occasional income that supplements their charity. Behind her waits a family group that challenges modern assumptions about medieval social structures. The father, William the Carter, lost his primary source of income when his horse died during the previous winter. Rather than abandon his family to seek work elsewhere, as many people believe was common, he has remained in the community while slowly rebuilding his fortunes through day labor and small tasks. The monastery supports this family stability by providing consistent aid that allows them to remain together during their crisis. You observe the almoner's careful attention to the children in this family, noting how he always ensures they receive their portions directly rather than simply handing everything to the parents. This reflects sophisticated understanding of family dynamics and the recognition that hungry children cannot wait for adult decisions about resource allocation. Medieval monks developed these insights through centuries of observing human nature at its most vulnerable, learning that effective charity often requires attention to psychological as well as physical needs. The distribution ritual itself follows patterns established by the rule of Saint Benedict, but refined through local experience. Each recipient approaches the window individually, maintaining the dignity of personal interaction rather than the chaos of mass feeding. The almoner speaks briefly with each person, asking about family circumstances, health concerns, or special needs that might affect their allocation. These conversations serve multiple purposes, providing both spiritual comfort and practical information for the monastery's records. A surprising fact emerges as you watch these interactions. The monks do not require recipients to attend religious services or listen to sermons before receiving aid. This contradicts popular beliefs about medieval charity being heavily conditional on religious compliance. Actually, the monastic approach recognized that forced piety defeats its own purpose. Faith must arise from genuine conviction, not from the coercion of hunger. The monks trusted that consistent kindness would eventually draw people towards spiritual curiosity, making dramatic conversion efforts unnecessary. The measuring and distribution of ale reveals another layer of monastic sophistication. The wooden cups used for this purpose vary in size based on the recipient's family situation and physical needs. Elderly recipients receive smaller portions of stronger ale, recognizing that their reduced appetites require more concentrated nutrition. Families with multiple children receive larger quantities of weaker ale, understanding that growing bodies need more liquid refreshment. These distinctions require the almoner to maintain detailed mental notes about each regular recipient's circumstances. You notice how the almoner handles each transaction with remarkable speed, while maintaining personal attention. His movements show the efficiency of long practice, but never hurry, that might make recipients feel rushed or unwelcome. This balance reflects careful training in what medieval religious texts call discretio, the ability to discern appropriate responses in complex human situations. The almoner has learned to read faces and body language, recognizing signs of illness, desperation, or embarrassment that might require modified approaches to standard procedures. The appearance of unusual recipients tests the almoner's judgment in ways that reveal the sophistication of monastic charity systems. A well-dressed merchant approaches the window, his clothing suggesting prosperity rather than need. Most people would assume such a person would be turned away immediately, but actually the medieval understanding of poverty included recognition that circumstances could change rapidly. Crop failures, bandit attacks, or business reversals could reduce the wealthy to destitution overnight. The almoner questions the merchant carefully but respectfully, determining that recent losses have indeed left his family facing genuine hardship despite appearances. This interaction illustrates a crucial aspect of monastic charity that modern people often misunderstand. The monks did not simply feed anyone who asked, nor did they restrict aid only to the obviously destitute. Instead, they developed nuanced criteria for assessing genuine need while avoiding both waste and cruelty. Their systems balanced compassion with stewardship, recognizing that poorly managed charity helps no one in the long term. The rhythm of distribution reveals careful attention to crowd management that prevented the chaos and violence that often accompanied secular charity distributions. Recipients know their approximate place in line based on previous visits and established customs. Families with small children receive priority during cold weather. Elderly or infirm recipients can rest on the stone benches rather than standing for extended periods. These arrangements developed gradually through trial and error as the monks learned from overcrowding incidents and occasional disputes. As the morning progresses, you witness the flexibility built into seemingly rigid systems. A family arrives with news of a house fire that destroyed their winter food stores. The almoner consults briefly with a senior monk who has emerged from the monastery proper, and together they authorize additional provisions beyond the standard allocation. This consultation process reveals the collaborative nature of monastic charity, where individual almoners operate within guidelines established by the entire community, rather than making arbitrary personal decisions. The physical handling of food and drink shows remarkable attention to hygiene and preservation, challenging stereotypes about medieval sanitation. Bread is kept in covered baskets to protect it from dust and insects. Alley containers are cleaned thoroughly between uses. Recipients bring their own vessels when possible, reducing the monastery's burden while ensuring that each family has appropriate containers for their portions. These practices reflect practical wisdom developed through centuries of food distribution, long before modern germ theory explained the reasons behind such precautions. The final recipients of the morning distribution include several categories that reveal the comprehensive nature of monastic social support. Travelling craftsmen receive provisions suitable for the road, including dried meat and hard cheese that will not spoil quickly. Pregnant women receive special consideration, often including additional ale and occasionally eggs or other protein-rich foods that support both mother and developing child. These distinctions require the almoner to maintain extensive knowledge about nutrition and health, making him as much a medical advisor as a charitable administrator. As the morning distribution concludes, you observe the careful cleanup and preparation for the day's second session. The almonry window closes, but the work continues inside as monks tally the morning's distributions, update their records, and begin preparations for the afternoon's smaller but equally important session. The empty baskets return to the bakehouse to await tomorrow's fresh loaves, while the measuring cups and scales receive thorough cleaning before being stored in their designated places. The gate itself receives attention as the last recipients depart. Servants sweep away crumbs and debris, ensuring that the area remains clean and dignified for future use. Fresh straw replaces any soiled covering, while the water in the public well receives testing to ensure its continued purity. These maintenance tasks reflect the monks' understanding that the physical environment of charity affects both giver and receiver, with cleanliness and order contributing to the spiritual atmosphere of compassionate giving. Behind the almonry window lies a world that most recipients never see, a carefully organized storehouse that represents centuries of accumulated wisdom about preserving, organizing, and distributing material aid. You step through the heavy oak door into the almonry's interior, where the mingled scents of dried herbs, aged wood, and stored grain create an atmosphere of abundance held in careful reserve. The walls stretch higher than you might expect, lined with shelving systems that maximize storage while maintaining easy access. These are not crude wooden planks, but sophisticated constructions built by the monastery's own carpenters, featuring adjustable heights, protective lips to prevent items from falling, and even primitive ventilation systems that allow air to circulate around stored goods. Each shelf bears small wooden tags inscribed with Latin abbreviations that identify contents and indicate rotation schedules for perishable items. The grain storage reveals engineering sophistication that challenges assumptions about medieval food preservation. Large ceramic vessels, some reaching nearly to your waist, contain different types of grain, separated by quality and intended use. The finest wheat, reserved for special occasions and seriously ill recipients, occupies the vessels closest to the window for easy access. Barley, oats and mixed grains fill the larger containers toward the back, their contents carefully rotated to prevent spoilage and insect infestation. Most people imagine medieval storage as haphazard piling of goods in whatever containers happen to be available, but actually these monastic systems rival modern warehouse organization. Each grain vessel bears detailed records carved into clay tablets that hang nearby, indicating when the grain was harvested, where it originated, and what preservation treatments it received. The monks developed sophisticated understanding of moisture content, temperature control, and pest management through centuries of trial and error. You notice small cloth bags hanging from hooks along one wall, each containing different herbs and spices used to preserve stored food and improve its nutritional value. Rosemary and thyme help prevent rancidity in stored fats, while garlic and onions provide both flavor and natural antibacterial properties. These additions transform the basic bread and porridge of monastic charity into more palatable and healthful meals, reflecting the monks' understanding that nourishment involves more than simply filling empty stomachs. The clothing section occupies an entire wall of the armoury, organised with the same systematic precision as the food stores. Wooden pegs hold garments sorted by size, condition and season, while large wooden chests contain smaller items like shoes, belts and head coverings. The variety surprises you, challenging modern assumptions about medieval clothing being uniformly coarse and colourless. Here hang woolen cloaks dyed in deep browns and greens, linen shirts bleached to respectful whiteness, and even occasional silk items donated by wealthy patrons seeking spiritual merit through charitable giving. The source of these garments reveals a complex network that extends far beyond the monastery walls. Some items arrive as donations from local families clearing out the belongings of deceased relatives. Others come from wealthy merchants and nobles who commission extra clothing specifically for charitable distribution. The most interesting pieces originate from the monastery's own workshops, where monks and lay brothers spend evening hours mending, altering, and creating garments from donated cloth and salvaged materials. Each piece of clothing receives careful inspection and preparation before distribution. Brother Marcus, whose primary responsibility involves textile maintenance, examines every garment for tears, stains, or pest damage. Minor repairs happen immediately, while more extensive problems require assignment to the monastery's sewing workshop. This attention to quality reflects the monks' understanding that dignity matters as much as utility. A person wearing clean, well-maintained clothing maintains self-respect even in poverty, while someone dressed in obvious rags faces additional social barriers that compound their difficulties. The sizing and alteration system demonstrates remarkable sophistication in accommodating diverse body types and family needs. The monks maintain detailed measurements for regular recipients, allowing them to set aside appropriately sized garments before distribution day. For children in poor families, they often select slightly larger items that allow for growth, understanding that replacement clothing may not be available for months or years. These considerations require the clothing almoner to maintain extensive knowledge about human development, family circumstances, and seasonal clothing needs. Storage of leather goods presents particular challenges that the monks have solved through innovative techniques. Shoes, belts, and leather aprons require protection from moisture and pests while remaining accessible for distribution. Wooden boxes lined with aromatic cedar shavings provide pest control, while careful positioning away from exterior walls prevents moisture damage. The monks learned through experience that leather goods could determine whether a recipient could work effectively, making their preservation crucial to the success of charitable efforts. The seasonal rotation of stored materials reveals planning sophistication that rivals modern logistics operations. As autumn approaches, heavy woolen items move to more accessible positions, while summer linens shift toward long-term storage areas. This rotation requires detailed inventory management and advanced planning, as the monks must anticipate needs months in advance while working within limited storage space. Their success in this complex task reflects generations of accumulated experience and careful record keeping. The food preservation area showcases medieval technology at its most advanced. Clay vessels sealed with beeswax contain preserved meats that can last for months without spoilage. Wooden barrels hold pickled vegetables that provide essential nutrients during winter months when fresh produce becomes unavailable. Dried fruits hang in cloth bags that allow air circulation while preventing insect access. These preservation techniques represent the culmination of centuries of experimentation, much of it conducted in monastery kitchens where failure meant hungry communities. Salt storage receives special attention due to its crucial importance in food preservation and its considerable expense. Large wooden containers with tight-fitting lids protect this valuable commodity from moisture and theft. The salt itself comes from various sources, some purchased from coastal regions at considerable expense, others obtained through trade relationships with other monasteries. The careful rationing of salt for charitable food preparation requires precise calculation, as too little fails to preserve effectively while too much makes food inedible. The wine and ale storage reveals another layer of monastic sophistication in managing liquid refreshment for charitable distribution. Wooden casks of various sizes contain different strengths of alcoholic beverages appropriate for different recipients and seasons. Small casks hold strong wine, reserved for sick recipients who need concentrated nutrition. Medium barrels contain the standard ale distributed most commonly. Large containers hold weak ale, suitable for children and pregnant women. This variety requires extensive knowledge of brewing techniques and careful monitoring of fermentation processes. The organisation of medical supplies within the almonry challenges modern assumptions about medieval healthcare. Wooden boxes contain herbs and prepared remedies that supplement the basic food distribution with targeted health support. Willow bark for pain relief, chamomile for digestive problems, and honey for wound treatment represent sophisticated understanding of medicinal properties. The almoner works closely with the monastery's infirmarian to ensure that recipients with specific health needs receive appropriate supplementation to their basic food rations. Tools and household goods occupy specialized storage areas designed to protect metal items from rust and wooden implements from warping. Iron pots, wooden spoons, clay bowls, and simple farming tools wait for distribution to families whose possessions have been lost to fire, flood, or other disasters. The maintenance of these items requires regular inspection and occasional repair, creating additional work for the monastery's craftsmen, but ensuring that distributed goods remain functional and useful. The system for tracking individual allocations involves both written records and physical organization methods that prevent fraud while maintaining recipient dignity. Color-coded wooden tokens identify families entitled to specific types of aid, while small notches in wooden tallies track the frequency and type of previous distributions. These physical tracking systems work alongside the written records, providing backup verification while remaining simple enough for non-literate assistants to use effectively. Special storage areas accommodate unusual donations that require creative distribution strategies. A corner cabinet holds books donated by wealthy patrons, primarily religious texts, but occasionally practical manuals on farming, crafts, or household management. These represent tremendous value in a largely illiterate society, distributed carefully to recipients who can read or who have family members capable of benefiting from written knowledge. The selection process for book distribution requires the almoner to assess not just need, but also capacity to benefit from such specialized aid. The seasonal variation in available goods creates complex planning challenges that the monks have learned to manage through diversified sourcing and careful timing. Spring brings donations of seeds and young plants from the monastery gardens. Summer provides fresh vegetables and fruits that supplement the basic bread and ale rations. Autumn delivers the year's largest influx of preserved foods and warm clothing as families prepare for winter. Winter brings the greatest need but fewest new donations, requiring careful management of stored resources to maintain consistent aid levels. The distribution of cloth and raw materials allows recipients to create their own solutions to material needs, reflecting monastic understanding that self-sufficiency serves both practical and spiritual purposes. Lengths of undyed wool enable families to create their own garments suited to specific needs. Leather scraps provide material for shoe repair and simple tools. Iron stock allows families with metalworking skills to create needed implements. This approach recognizes that many poor families possess valuable skills that lack only raw materials for effective application. The integration of charitable distribution with the monastery's own production systems creates efficiencies that maximize the impact of available resources. Clothing worn out by monastery residents moves to charitable distribution rather than waste disposal. Food approaching the limits of safe storage for the monastic community gets priority distribution to prevent spoilage. Workshop scraps and production overruns find new life as charitable supplies. This systematic approach to resource utilization reflects sophisticated understanding of waste reduction and community benefit maximization. The physical layout of the almonry itself facilitates efficient distribution while maintaining security and organization. Wide aisles allow easy movement of heavy containers and bulky items. Good lighting from multiple windows enables accurate assessment of goods and careful record keeping. Separate areas for different types of materials prevent cross-contamination and simplify inventory management. The design represents accumulated wisdom about workflow optimization that would impress modern warehouse managers. As evening approaches and the day's distribution activities wind down, you observe the careful restoration of order that prepares the almonry for tomorrow's needs. Empty containers return to their designated positions. Depleted supplies receive notation for replacement, and the entire space undergoes cleaning that maintains the sanitary conditions essential for food storage. This daily cycle of distribution, organization, and preparation represents the heartbeat of monastic charity, a rhythm that has sustained communities through centuries of social and economic upheaval. The soft scratch of quill on parchment fills the small chamber adjacent to the main almonry, where Brother Geoffrey bends over his desk in the golden light of afternoon. His careful script flows across the page in lines so precise they might have been drawn with a ruler, each letter formed with the deliberate care that transforms mundane record-keeping into an art form. This is the hidden heart of monastic charity, where every act of kindness finds its permanent home in carefully maintained ledgers that stretch back generations. The desk itself tells a story of priorities within the monastery's hierarchy. While the abbot's writing table boasts elaborate carving and expensive imported woods, Brother Geoffrey's workspace shows humble functionality elevated to quiet elegance. The oak surface, worn smooth by decades of use, bears the faint impressions of countless entries pressed through layers of parchment. Shallow grooves mark where previous almoners rested their rulers while creating the precise columns that organize charitable data into comprehensible patterns. You lean closer to observe the current entry being recorded, surprised by the level of detail captured in each transaction. Where modern people might expect simple lists of recipients and amounts distributed, you instead see complex narratives that would satisfy any contemporary social worker. Here is the entry for Margaret the widow, noting not just the 2 loaves of bread and cup of ale she received, but also her complaint of joint pain that may require consultation with the infirmarian, her concern about her youngest son's persistent cough, and her mention of a possible opportunity for spinning work that might reduce her dependence on charitable aid. The writing materials themselves represent significant investment in the charitable enterprise. The parchment comes from calf skins carefully prepared in the monastery's own scriptorium, where the same techniques that create illuminated manuscripts produce durable surfaces for recording charitable transactions. The ink combines oak gall, iron and gum arabic in proportions refined through centuries of experimentation, creating a mixture that resists fading and remains legible long after cheaper inks have vanished entirely. Most people assume medieval record-keeping involved crude tallies and approximate measurements, but actually these monastic systems achieve precision that rivals modern accounting practices. Brother Geoffrey maintains separate ledgers for different types of charitable activity, cross-referenced through ingenious numbering systems that allow quick retrieval of information about individual recipients, seasonal patterns, or resource allocation trends. His training included months of instruction in these methods, passed down through an unbroken chain of almoners stretching back to the monastery's foundation. The main charity ledger reveals organizational sophistication that challenges assumptions about medieval administrative capacity. Each recipient receives a unique identifying number based on their first appearance in the records, creating permanent tracking capability even when names might be spelled differently by various scribes. Family relationships are carefully mapped, allowing the almoners to understand household structures and avoid duplicate aid to the same family unit. Special symbols indicate recipients with particular medical needs, temporary residents requiring short-term assistance, and individuals whose circumstances may require periodic reassessment. A separate register tracks the sources and quantities of charitable supplies, creating what amounts to an early inventory management system. Every loaf of bread, baked specifically for charitable distribution, receives notation, along with the type of grain used, and any special additives that might affect storage or nutritional value. Clothing donations are catalogued by type, condition, and estimated size, with notes about any repairs or alterations required before distribution. This attention to supply chain management ensures that the monastery can predict and prevent shortages while maximizing the utility of available resources. The financial records reveal the most surprising aspect of monastic charitable operations. Rather than the simple alms giving that modern people envision, these institutions operated complex financial systems that included lending, investment, and economic development activities designed to generate sustainable funding for charitable programs. Brother Geoffrey maintains detailed accounts of money loaned to struggling farmers at favourable interest rates, investments in local commercial ventures that provide steady income streams, and partnerships with craft guilds that create employment opportunities for able-bodied recipients of charitable aid. You discover that the monastery operates what amounts to an early credit union, providing small loans to poor families facing temporary crises while charging interest rates significantly below those demanded by commercial moneylenders. The records show careful assessment of borrowers' circumstances and realistic repayment schedules that account for seasonal variations in agricultural income. Default rates appear remarkably low, suggesting sophisticated understanding of risk assessment and borrower counselling that protected both lender and borrower from unrealistic expectations. The cross-referencing system extends beyond individual records to encompass regional patterns and inter-monastery cooperation that created early networks of social support. Brother Geoffrey maintains correspondence with almoners at neighbouring monasteries, sharing information about travelling recipients, coordinating responses to regional crises, and preventing duplicate aid that might encourage fraud while ensuring that genuine need receives adequate attention regardless of jurisdictional boundaries. These inter-monastery networks reveal coordination capabilities that challenge assumptions about medieval communication limitations. Regular messengers carry sealed packets of information about recipients who might seek aid from multiple sources, individuals whose circumstances require special attention, and emerging social problems that might benefit from coordinated responses. The careful encryption of sensitive personal information in these communications shows sophisticated understanding of privacy protection, even when sharing data for charitable purposes. The seasonal analysis contained in the records demonstrates predictive capabilities that enabled proactive rather than merely reactive charitable responses. By tracking patterns over multiple years, the almoners learn to anticipate periods of increased need and adjust their resource acquisition and distribution schedules accordingly. Late summer regularly brought influx of harvest workers whose seasonal employment ended before winter work became available. Early spring typically saw increased requests from families whose stored food supplies had been exhausted before new crops matured. The medical notation system reveals collaboration between charitable and healthcare functions that created comprehensive support for recipients with complex needs. Special symbols indicate individuals receiving treatment from the monastery's infirmarian, with careful coordination between food distribution and medical care that recognized the interconnection between nutrition and healing. Recipients recovering from illness might receive enhanced rations, including eggs, wine, or specially prepared broths that supported recovery, while their families received compensatory assistance to offset the increased burden. Quality control measures embedded in the record-keeping system prevent fraud while maintaining dignity for legitimate recipients. The detailed personal information collected during initial registration enables verification of identity and circumstances without intrusive questioning during routine distributions. Cross-references with local parish records and relationships with village authorities provide background verification while avoiding the appearance of suspicion or distrust that might discourage people from seeking needed assistance. The apprenticeship system for training new almoners involved extensive instruction in these record-keeping methods, recognizing that administrative competence directly affected charitable effectiveness. New almoners spent months learning to read and interpret the various symbols, abbreviations, and cross-referencing systems before being permitted to make independent entries. This training included instruction in handwriting standards that ensured consistency across multiple scribes and time periods, creating permanent records that remained accessible to future administrators. The storage and preservation of completed records reveals understanding of their long-term value that extends beyond immediate administrative needs. Completed ledgers receive careful binding in leather covers, treated with oils that resist moisture and insects. Storage in specially designed wooden cabinets protects the volumes from light damage while allowing easy access for reference purposes. The oldest surviving records, some dating back over 2 centuries, remain fully legible and continue to provide valuable information about family histories and regional social patterns. The linguistic sophistication of the records challenges assumptions about medieval literacy and education levels. While the primary text appears in Latin, the almoners regularly incorporated vernacular terms for specialized items, local place names, and personal nicknames that aid in accurate identification. This multilingual approach required considerable education and cultural awareness, suggesting that almoners represented some of the most intellectually capable members of their monastic communities. The integration of charitable records with the monastery's broader administrative systems created comprehensive databases that supported informed decision-making across multiple institutional functions. Information about local economic conditions gathered through charitable work informed the monastery's agricultural planning and commercial investments. Knowledge about family structures and social relationships gained through aid distribution supported legal and diplomatic activities that required understanding of local power dynamics and social networks. The audit procedures built into the record-keeping system demonstrate accountability measures that protected both the monastery and its charitable recipients from abuse or mismanagement. Senior monks conducted regular reviews of charitable records, checking for mathematical accuracy, logical consistency, and compliance with established policies. These reviews included verification through independent sources and comparison with physical inventories, to ensure that recorded distributions matched actual resource expenditure. The privacy protection measures reveal sophisticated understanding of the social risks faced by charity recipients and the importance of maintaining confidentiality about personal circumstances. Access to detailed charitable records was strictly limited to authorized personnel, with different levels of information availability based on administrative need and institutional hierarchy. Sensitive information about family problems, medical conditions, or economic difficulties received special protection through coded entries that prevented casual observers from accessing private details. The documentation of special cases and exceptional circumstances creates fascinating glimpses into medieval social problems and the monastery's responses to unusual situations. Here are records of refugees from distant conflicts, victims of natural disasters, and individuals whose circumstances defied standard categorization. Each case includes detailed analysis of the situation, consultation with senior administrators, and careful tracking of outcomes that informed future responses to similar problems. The integration of charitable record-keeping with broader institutional memory preserved important social history while supporting continuing charitable effectiveness. References to previous economic crises, successful intervention strategies, and lessons learned from failed approaches created institutional knowledge that transcended individual administrative tenures. New almoners could consult decades of accumulated wisdom about managing resources, assessing needs, and maintaining sustainable charitable programs. As Brother Geoffrey completes his afternoon entries and carefully blots the fresh ink, you observe the ritual of securing the records that concludes each day's administrative work. The ledgers return to their designated positions in locked cabinets, while working materials receive cleaning and proper storage. Keys pass to the next shift of administrators through formal procedures that maintain security while ensuring continuous coverage. This careful attention to administrative detail reflects understanding that effective charity requires not just generous hearts, but also competent management of the complex systems that transform good intentions into lasting assistance for those who need it most. The next morning brings familiar faces to the almonry window, each carrying stories that challenge modern assumptions about medieval poverty and social mobility. You watch as Edmund, the former merchant, approaches with the measured dignity of someone still adjusting to changed circumstances. 6 months ago, he employed 3 apprentices in his successful cloth trading business. Today he carries the wooden bowl that marks him as a recipient of monastic charity. His fine woolen cloak now carefully mended, and his leather boots resoled with cheaper materials. Edmund's presence reveals how quickly fortune could reverse in medieval society, where a single bad investment or unfortunate encounter with bandits could reduce prosperity to destitution overnight. Most people imagine medieval social classes as rigidly fixed, with peasants remaining peasants and merchants maintaining their status throughout life. But actually the records show remarkable social mobility in both directions, with successful craftsmen rising to merchant status, while economic disasters could push established traders into temporary or permanent poverty. The almoner greets Edmund with the same respectful courtesy shown to all recipients, understanding that poverty carries enough humiliation without adding unnecessary reminders of changed status. This approach reflects sophisticated monastic psychology that recognized how shame could compound material hardship, making recovery more difficult and sometimes impossible. The monks learned that maintaining dignity often proved as important as providing food, creating conditions where temporary assistance could help people rebuild rather than simply survive. Behind Edmund stands a group that represents one of medieval society's most vulnerable populations. 3 women, none past their 30th year, huddle together with children clinging to their skirts. These are the widows whose husbands died in the recent mill collapse, victims of an industrial accident that left entire families without income or protection. Medieval law provided little support for such women, who often faced the choice between remarriage to unsuitable partners or gradual descent into complete destitution. The monastery's response to these widows demonstrates understanding of gender-specific challenges that modern people might find surprisingly enlightened. Rather than treating them as temporary charity cases, the almoner has worked with local craft guilds to arrange spinning and weaving work that allows the women to earn income while caring for their children. This approach recognizes that sustainable assistance requires addressing the underlying causes of poverty rather than simply treating its symptoms. Young Godwin approaches the window next, his story illustrating another category of medieval poverty that challenges contemporary stereotypes. Born with a withered arm that prevents heavy manual labour, he might be expected to live entirely on charity in a society that valued physical strength. Instead, the monastery has identified his exceptional memory and quick wit, arranging for him to serve as a messenger and record keeper for local merchants who need someone literate and trustworthy. His charitable food rations supplement earnings that allow him to maintain independence while contributing productively to his community. The sight of foreign faces among the recipients reveals the international scope of medieval charity networks. Hans and Greta, refugees from Germanic territories devastated by ongoing conflicts, arrived at the monastery speaking no English but carrying letters of introduction from religious communities in their homeland. These documents, written in Latin that crosses language barriers, provide detailed information about their circumstances and previous charitable relationships, enabling the local almoners to provide appropriate assistance while verifying their legitimacy. These foreign refugees challenge assumptions about medieval xenophobia and insularity. Rather than viewing strangers with automatic suspicion, the monastic system included sophisticated procedures for assessing and assisting people from distant regions. The international network of religious communities created early passport systems that enabled legitimate travellers to receive help while protecting local resources from fraud. This cosmopolitan approach reflected the universal nature of Christian charity that transcended ethnic and political boundaries. The arrival of a well-dressed young woman creates visible tension among the other recipients, who recognize her as Isabella, daughter of a prosperous wool merchant. Her presence at the charity window seems to contradict everything visible about her circumstances, from her clean linen dress to her unbroken leather shoes. Yet the almoner's records tell a different story, revealing that her father's recent death has left the family financially devastated, while legal complications prevent access to their inherited assets. Isabella's situation illustrates the complex relationship between appearance and actual need that required sophisticated assessment techniques. Medieval society placed enormous emphasis on maintaining appropriate dress for one's social station, often at considerable personal cost. Families might spend their last coins on clothing that preserved social standing while secretly facing hunger, understanding that visible poverty could destroy business relationships and marriage prospects essential for long-term recovery. The presence of children among the charity recipients reveals another challenging aspect of medieval social welfare. These are not just the offspring of poor adults, but children whose circumstances require independent assessment and assistance. Some are orphans whose extended families cannot provide adequate care. Others come from families so large that even employed parents cannot feed all their children adequately. A few represent children whose parents have died or disappeared, leaving them to survive through their own resourcefulness and whatever help they can find. The monastery's approach to child welfare demonstrates remarkably modern understanding of childhood development and social responsibility. Rather than treating children simply as miniature adults or temporary burdens, the almoners assess each child's specific needs, potential, and family situation to provide targeted assistance that supports both immediate survival and long-term development. Particularly bright children might receive educational opportunities, while those showing craft aptitude could be connected with appropriate masters for apprenticeship training. An elderly couple approaches slowly, their matching gait suggesting years of shared hardship. Thomas and Beatrice the Weavers represent another category of medieval poverty that challenges modern assumptions about retirement and old age support. After decades of productive work in the textile trades, age-related ailments have reduced their income below subsistence levels, while they remain too proud to burden their adult children with additional expenses during difficult economic times. Their story reveals the sophisticated understanding of aging that medieval communities developed through practical experience. Rather than viewing elderly poverty as inevitable, the monastery works to identify ways that older recipients can continue contributing to their communities while receiving necessary support. Thomas's failing eyesight prevents fine weaving, but his accumulated knowledge makes him valuable as a teacher for young apprentices. Beatrice's arthritic hands cannot manage a full loom, but she excels at spinning thread that others can weave into cloth. The seasonal variation in recipients creates constantly changing dynamics at the almonry window. Winter brings families whose food stores have been exhausted before spring planting can provide relief. Summer sees increased numbers of agricultural workers whose seasonal employment has ended, while harvest work remains months away. Autumn delivers victims of crop failures and early storms that destroy winter preparations. Each season requires different approaches and resources, demanding flexibility and advanced planning from the monastic administrators. The appearance of a group of craftsmen reveals how economic disruption could affect entire professional communities rather than just individual families. These are stoneworkers whose employment ended when the cathedral project in the nearby town ran out of funding, leaving skilled artisans without income, despite their valuable abilities. This situation demonstrates how medieval economic systems created interdependence that could spread financial problems rapidly through connected communities. The monastery's response to these displaced craftsmen illustrates understanding of economic development that seems remarkably sophisticated for its era. Rather than simply providing temporary food aid, the almoners work to identify new construction projects that could employ these skills, sometimes advancing money to potential employers or guaranteeing worker reliability to encourage hiring. This approach recognizes that preserving skilled workforces serves broader community interests while providing more sustainable assistance than indefinite charity. Among the regular recipients, you notice individuals whose stories reveal the complex relationships between disability, productivity, and social acceptance in medieval society. Here stands Catherine the Blind Weaver, whose lost sight has paradoxically enhanced her reputation for producing exceptionally fine cloth through heightened tactile sensitivity. Her charitable rations supplement substantial earnings that make her one of the most financially successful recipients, illustrating how medieval communities could find ways to accommodate disabilities while maintaining productivity and dignity. The presence of former religious personnel among the charity recipients challenges assumptions about medieval clerical privilege and security. Brother Martin, expelled from a distant monastery for violations of monastic discipline, now survives through manual labour supplemented by charitable aid while seeking readmission to religious life. His situation reveals that medieval clergy faced the same economic uncertainties as secular society, with misconduct or institutional changes potentially leaving them without resources or social support systems. The integration of former criminals and social outcasts among the charity recipients demonstrates the rehabilitative aspects of monastic social philosophy. These individuals, having completed legal punishments for their offences, receive charitable assistance aimed at reintegrating them into productive community roles rather than perpetuating their exclusion from mainstream society. This approach reflects sophisticated understanding of crime prevention and social healing that recognise the connection between economic opportunity and lawful behaviour. The variation in family structures among recipients reveals the diversity of domestic arrangements that characterised medieval society. Beyond the nuclear families that modern people might expect, the records include extended kinship groups caring for orphaned relatives, informal adoptions that created family bonds without legal formalisation, and households built around economic cooperation rather than blood relationships. Each arrangement requires different approaches to charitable assistance that account for complex internal dynamics and resource-sharing patterns. The documentation of individual success stories provides evidence for the effectiveness of monastic charitable strategies in creating lasting positive change rather than merely preventing starvation. Former recipients appear in the records as donors, contributing goods or services to support current charity operations. Others transition from receiving aid to providing employment for fellow community members, creating positive cycles that multiply the impact of initial charitable investments. The careful tracking of recipient outcomes reveals sophisticated understanding of program evaluation that modern social service agencies would recognise. The almoners monitor not just immediate relief provided, but long-term changes in recipient circumstances, identifying which approaches prove most effective for different types of need and adjusting their strategies accordingly. This data-driven approach to charity reflects the same empirical methods that monasteries applied to agriculture, crafts, and other practical activities. As the afternoon light begins to fade and the day's final recipients receive their allocated assistance, you observe the quiet satisfaction that marks successful completion of another day's charitable work. The faces that appeared at the almonry window represent not just individual stories of hardship and hope, but a comprehensive portrait of medieval society's most vulnerable members and the sophisticated systems developed to support them through crisis toward recovery and renewed productivity. As twilight settles over the monastery walls, you witness the final ritual that closes each day's charitable activities. The almonry window slides shut with a soft wooden whisper, sealing away the organised compassion that has flowed through this opening for generations. The last recipients disappear into the gathering dusk, carrying with them not just bread and ale, but the quiet dignity that comes from being seen, recorded, and remembered by a community that views their welfare as sacred responsibility. The evening cleanup reveals the true scope of what you have witnessed throughout this long day. Brother Jeffrey emerges from his record-keeping chamber, ink still drying on the final entries that will preserve today's acts of charity for future generations. His ledgers contain more than administrative data. They hold the stories of human resilience, institutional wisdom, and the patient work of building systems that transform individual suffering into community strength. The shelves of the almonry, now partially empty by the day's distributions, await tomorrow's restocking from the monastery's various production centres. Fresh bread will arrive before dawn, still warm from ovens tended through the night hours. New clothing donations will receive inspection and preparation for future distribution. The rhythm continues, as steady and reliable as the canonical hours that structure monastic life, creating a foundation of security for those who have nowhere else to turn. You observe the careful inventory taking that concludes each day's operations, watching as monks count remaining supplies and calculate tomorrow's distribution capacity. This mathematical precision serves compassion rather than restricting it, ensuring that resources stretch far enough to help the maximum number of people while maintaining the sustainability that enables long-term assistance. The balance between generosity and stewardship reflects centuries of accumulated wisdom about managing charitable operations. The financial calculations reveal the remarkable economic impact of these daily charitable activities. The monastery's investment in helping the poor creates ripple effects that strengthen the entire regional economy. Recipients who receive temporary assistance during crises return to productive work sooner than they might otherwise. Children who receive adequate nutrition during their growing years develop into more capable adults. Families that maintain stability through difficult periods contribute more effectively to their communities over time. These economic benefits extend beyond individual success stories to encompass systematic improvements in regional prosperity and stability. Communities with effective charitable safety nets experience less crime, as desperate people have alternatives to theft. They maintain higher levels of skilled craftsmen, as economic disruptions do not force talented individuals to abandon their training. They develop stronger social cohesion, as visible care for the vulnerable creates trust and cooperation that benefits everyone. The international connections visible in the day's charitable activities illustrate how these monastery systems contributed to broader medieval civilization. The network of religious communities that shared information about refugees and travelers created early international humanitarian cooperation that transcended political boundaries. The economic development strategies pioneered in monastic charitable work influenced secular approaches to poverty relief and social support. The record-keeping methods developed for tracking charitable distributions contributed to the administrative techniques that enabled medieval governments to manage increasingly complex societies. The educational impact of monastic charity extends beyond the immediate recipients to encompass the training of administrators who carried these techniques into secular service. Former monastery officials brought their experience with systematic charity to royal courts, merchant guilds, and municipal governments, spreading sophisticated approaches to social welfare throughout medieval Europe. The institutional knowledge preserved in monastic records provided templates that influenced charitable organizations for centuries after the medieval period ended. As night deepens around the monastery, you reflect on the profound challenge these medieval communities addressed through their charitable systems. They faced poverty, disability, economic disruption, and social displacement with limited resources and primitive technology, yet created responses that achieved remarkable success in both immediate relief and long-term social improvement. Their solutions required no external funding agencies, government mandates, or professional social service bureaucracies, emerging instead from religious conviction applied through practical intelligence and sustained commitment. The sustainability of these systems impresses as much as their effectiveness. The charitable operations you have witnessed today represent not experimental programs or temporary responses to crisis, but mature institutions that have operated continuously for centuries while adapting to changing circumstances. Their success stems from integration with broader monastic activities that generate the resources and institutional stability necessary for long-term charitable commitment. The dignity preserved throughout these charitable interactions reflects sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. The monks recognize that effective assistance must address not just physical needs, but the emotional and spiritual dimensions of poverty that could either support or undermine recovery efforts. Their approach balanced accountability with respect, creating systems that discouraged fraud without humiliating legitimate recipients. The comprehensiveness of monastic charitable systems addressed the full spectrum of human need, rather than focusing narrowly on food distribution or temporary relief. Medical care, educational opportunities, employment assistance, and family support services integrated into coherent programs that helped people rebuild their lives rather than merely surviving crisis periods. This holistic approach recognized the interconnected nature of human problems and the necessity of coordinated responses. The quiet efficiency that characterizes these operations demonstrates how effective charity can function without dramatic displays or emotional manipulation. The monks understood that sustainable assistance requires steady commitment rather than spectacular gestures, careful planning rather than spontaneous generosity, and systematic approach rather than random kindness. Their methods achieved maximum impact through minimum waste, ensuring that available resources helped as many people as possible. The record keeping that documents every charitable transaction serves purposes beyond administrative necessity. These careful records create institutional memory that enables continuous improvement in charitable methods. They provide accountability that protects both donors and recipients from abuse. They preserve individual stories that might otherwise vanish from history, creating lasting testimony to human dignity in the face of adversity. The integration of charitable work with other monastic activities demonstrates how social responsibility can strengthen rather than burden religious communities. The practical experience gained through daily contact with human need informed theological understanding while deepening spiritual commitment. The economic knowledge acquired through managing charitable resources enhanced the monastery's other business activities. The administrative skills developed for charitable operations proved valuable across all institutional functions. As you prepare to leave this peaceful scene of organized compassion, you carry with you images that challenge modern assumptions about medieval society and religious institutions. Rather than the primitive charity and crude social support systems that popular imagination might suggest, you have witnessed sophisticated approaches to poverty relief that achieved remarkable success through careful planning, systematic implementation, and sustained commitment. The faces that pass through the almonry window today represent more than individual charity cases. They embody the universal human experience of vulnerability and the community responsibility to respond with both compassion and wisdom. Their stories reveal how effective social support systems can transform temporary assistance into lasting positive change, creating stronger individuals, families, and communities. The monasteries that developed these charitable systems contributed far more to medieval civilization than their religious activities alone might suggest. They served as early research and development centers for social welfare techniques, as training institutions for administrative personnel, and as examples of how principled communities could address complex social problems through sustained cooperative effort. The lessons embedded in these medieval charitable systems remain relevant for contemporary discussions about poverty relief and social support. Their emphasis on dignity, sustainability, and comprehensive assistance offers alternatives to approaches that focus primarily on crisis intervention or temporary relief. Their integration of individual assessment with systematic distribution suggests methods for balancing compassion with accountability. Their success in creating positive long-term outcomes demonstrates the possibility of charitable work that truly transforms lives rather than merely alleviating symptoms. The quiet satisfaction visible in the monks' faces as they complete another day's charitable work reflects the deep fulfillment that comes from contributing meaningfully to human welfare. Their systematic approach to helping others creates not just material benefits for recipients, but spiritual rewards for those who give. The integration of charitable service with daily routine demonstrates how social responsibility can become natural expression of community values rather than burdensome obligation. As the monastery settles into the peaceful rhythms of evening prayer and rest, the charitable systems you have observed continue their quiet work. Tomorrow will bring new faces to the almonry window, new entries in the careful records, new opportunities to transform individual suffering into community strength. The cycle continues as it has for centuries, creating islands of hope and practical assistance in a world where such resources remain desperately needed. The almonry window may close each evening, but the compassion it represents never sleeps. In the careful preservation of food stores, the maintenance of clothing supplies, and the meticulous record-keeping that tracks every act of charity, you see evidence of communities that understood how love becomes most effective when expressed through wisdom, planning, and sustained commitment to the welfare of others. Thank you for joining us on this gentle journey through the charitable heart of medieval monasticism. If you enjoyed our exploration of these quiet systems of compassion and are still awake, we invite you to discover our other historical adventures through the peaceful corners of the past. And if you have drifted off to sleep during our time together, rest well and enjoy the campfire of dreams, where the warmth of human kindness burns eternal across the centuries.